thank you for joining us for today's Ipsos Lunch and Learn webinar, exploring Canadian health and wellness trends for 2025. Throughout today's session, you will remain in listen-only mode. However, throughout the webinar, please submit your questions online using the Q&A feature. Our plan is to answer your questions at the end of today's session. However, if time runs short, then your question will be answered by email. I also want to encourage you to check out the handouts we've uploaded to the webinar control panel. Today's session is being recorded and will also be directly emailed to you. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's discussion moderator, Cameron McFadden, Vice President of Strategic Growth for Ipsos Canada West. Cameron, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Ellen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is really exciting. We're starting a new series of Lunch and Learn webinars that we're hosting out of our Vancouver office today. Guests from all across the country, and we're glad to have you. That we've timed things for lunch for folks on the West, so it fits with them. And we're taking a bit of a different approach with some of these webinars than we have in the past. If you've joined other Ipsos webinars, often we start with a service line. Today we're starting with a vertical and an area of interest, we think, to companies all across the country around health and wellness. And as we change the page, we can see our speakers today who are also live here. Nami from our Essentials team and Jenny from our syndicated team. We're going to be listening to them as they share some key insights with us around health and wellness from studies that they run. Nami works with the Ipsos Essentials study that we do. And he's going to be looking at and talking to us about some of the big trends as far as how Canadians are feeling entering 2025, their place in the world, what's stressing them out, and what they're doing to address those feelings, how that's coming to bear. And then Jenny's going to use data from our 5 syndicated survey to explore the impact on food and consumption specifically in that context. So understanding how people are feeling about themselves, their lifestyles, what they're hoping to achieve this year, and then the role that food's going to play as part of that. These studies are studies that are run on an ongoing basis. Ipsos Essentials is run in multiple countries, as you can see. And customers and partners of ours are able to extract data and work with the team either on an ongoing basis or as a one-off, depending on what the team's looking for. Whereas 5 is an annual study that companies generally purchase once a year, and Jenny and the team work with them to get a deep understanding of their business and how the findings apply. So really, really strong sources of data, which we think are going to provide great insight. We appreciate you joining today. And I'm going to turn it over to Nami to get the presentation started, and I'll be watching for questions, and we'll bring them back at the end so we can address anything that comes up as we go along. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. So my name is Nami Hawk. Thanks everyone for joining today. I really appreciate you taking the time. We often say at Ipsos that context matters. And so I'm going to start, I know today is really about health and wellness, but I'm going to start today with a little bit more of a macro view. So I'll be looking at, oh, sorry about that. A little bit more of a macro view, looking about what's happening with Canadians. So what's up with Canada right now? So as Cameron mentioned, I run Ipsos Essentials, which is our syndicated global tracker. We look at behaviors and attitudes every month, including amongst 1,000 Canadians. And so that's the data that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I want to start off with a graph that is quite frankly a little bit shocking, but also really illuminating in terms of what's happening with Canadians today, particularly where they are emotionally and their mental state. So bold statement here, more citizens feel like things are out of control right now than during the height of the pandemic. And I'll show you that data. So what we do is we ask a number of attitudinal respondents about a number of attitudinal statements. This one is, I feel like things in my country are out of control right now. And you're looking at the percentage of Canadians that agree with that statement. And right now, that is 3/4 of Canadians in January 2025. So 75% of us feel like things are out of control. And that's higher than it was at any point during the pandemic since we've been tracking it. You can see, a couple of spikes there. During the pandemic, there was a lot more volatility. The feelings of being out of control really were tied to waves of COVID. And you can see, different waves of COVID had an impact there. That low point of 34% is really when vaccines became widely available, including to children in Canada. So you see a bit of a dip there. But even at the height of that craziness, we're feeling like things are more out of control right now. See, geopolitical issues, conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza had small spikes, but generally didn't register too much in terms of Canadian sentiment. And then there's that prolonged period of heightened inflation, which did cause the sentiment of people feeling things were out of control to tick up. And then it's really been sort of a steady climb since then. And if you think about the things that are impacting this nowadays, it's a lot broader than just COVID, right? And if you feel like you're at risk due to inflation, if you feel like your health and well-being is at risk, you're facing geopolitical risks or environmental risks, you're much more likely to say that you feel like things in the country are out of control. And health is actually having one of the biggest impacts. So amongst Canadians that feel like their health and well-being is at risk, 90% of them feel like things in the country are out of control right now. Now you may, as Canadians, we often pride ourselves as, having things a little bit more together maybe than our American friends to the south. And for the most part, that's been true. We can see the line of what's been happening in the US. And for the better part of the last 4 years, we've been in a better place. More Americans felt that things were out of control than Canadians did. But, look at January 2025. We've caught up, guys. we're right there with the Americans. So, it may seem odd to think about the pandemic as being the good old days, but in many ways it was, in terms of we only had one issue to worry about, right? Everyone was focused on COVID and things like the economy, the environment, geopolitical issues, leadership concerns. All of that took a bit of a back seat, but that's really changed now. And at Ipsos, we use the term polycrisis. So in Canada, we're really facing a polycrisis. It's not one issue anymore. It's a great many things that are creating stress and creating concern for Canadians. Rising prices and inflation is the #1 issue, and a lot of the top issues are related to finances, housing prices, affordability, personal financial concerns. You have political situation and leadership concerns, and the environment rounding out the top 5, and health there at #6. And you see the biggest shifts compared to last year really around political concerns and leadership concerns, and the biggest drop around global conflicts. So Canadians have become a little bit more inward looking, not surprising, particularly this January with everything we've seen, Prime Minister resigning and sort of a lot of uncertainty around the leadership of the country. So that's not too surprising. And while, the comparative concern around health hasn't changed, it's sort of the same as it was this time last year, when we double click on health, we do see that there is an uptick in the number of Canadians that are feeling stressed about their health and well-being. So another couple statements here, I'm feeling stressed, or I'm feeling good mentally and physically. And the changes weren't dramatic compared to the beginning of the year, but there are more Canadians now that are feeling stressed. So it's 55% of Canadians right now say they're feeling stressed, and fewer Canadians than this time last year saying they feel good mentally and physically. And if you think about, what's stressing Canadians out, well, it's a lot of the same things that were cited in terms of their top concerns. So the list mirrors what we saw on the previous page. It's high cost of living, it's lack of financial stability, it's lack of sleep made it up there, sort of a health-related one, not saving up for retirement, environment, climate change, political leadership. And we know that, a lot of the health concerns are tied to financial concerns. When we look at people who are financially stressed, they also tend to report higher stress in terms of their health and well-being, both physically and mentally. And so those two tend to move together, and they're very hand in hand. In terms of, more people are feeling stressed. More people are also feeling like their health and well-being is at risk. So this is a different data point, but related. We asked people about the perceived risk to their overall health and well-being. Is it high, medium, or low? And so this is the combination of people said that they felt that the risk to their overall health and well-being was high or medium, moderate risk, and that's grown pretty dramatically over the last year. If you think about the shift in 1 year, it's over a 10-point increase in terms of people feeling like their health and well-being is at risk. So far, not a very rosy picture in terms of what's happening in Canada, unfortunately, in terms of how Canadians are feeling, in terms of our health and well-being. I know many of the participants in today's webinar are probably brands or retailers that are hoping to join today to get more insights about how to better target Canadians and bring offers related to health and well-being. And it's really, I'm glad that you guys did join. It's a really good thing that you are joining, because one more sort of bad news is that right now, Canadians don't perceive that you are doing a good job. So this question is asking Canadians to rate different institutions, stores, retailers, brands and manufacturers, and the government in this case. How do you rate these institutions in terms of helping improve your health and well-being? Right now, for both retailers and brands, it's a failing grade. So unfortunately, those pink bars, that's people rating brands, retailers as poor or very poor, and it's 7 out of 10 Canadians. The government doesn't fare much better. If you wanted to compare that, you may think, well, how does that compare globally, or how are we doing relative to the US? Globally, the numbers are better, and in the US, they are also better. About half of Americans rate brands and retailers as doing a very good or good job, compared to only 3 out of 10 in Canada. If there's any HR folks in the audience, that's one bright spot. So we also asked, not shown on the page, but we asked about employers, and 6 out of 10 Canadians give employers a good or very good rating in terms of helping improve their personal health and well-being. And we know there's been a lot more emphasis in the workplace around mental health, around health and well-being, and so we're seeing that in the data as well. So if you're an employer and you're looking at this from an employee health perspective, you can pat yourself on the back. So far, not great news in terms of seeing positive signals, but there is some positive news. Canadians are on a health journey, and we do see that they're taking steps towards positive change. Amongst all the things that are stressing Canadians out, the financial situation, inflation, rising prices, the environment, one of the things that's most controllable is your health, to a certain extent, right? There's steps that you can take to try to live a healthier life, to try to improve your well-being, and Canadians are doing that. So what we're looking at here is measures taken in the past 4 weeks to stay healthy. Typically, we see a jump in these numbers at the beginning of the year. In past years, we've asked this for a number of years. In past years, you see a spike in sort of January, February. People are focused on health in the beginning of the year, and then it sort of tapers off. During 2024 was the first time we really saw sustained focus on health. So throughout the year, people continue to tell us, yeah, we're going to eat more, we're eating more nutritious food, we're exercising. And so this January compared to last January, we're seeing an increase in a lot of these measures, particularly around exercising regularly, spending more times outdoors, and getting more support from family and friends. So some good news story for Canadians. Now this is across all Canada, so this is the average across all Canadians, but not all health and wellness messaging is going to resonate with Canadians equally. So in order to understand how consumers approach health and wellness in different ways, we created 5 different consumer groups, distinct consumer groups, to try to understand this a little bit better. So I'll take you through the groups that we have in Canada. And we've organized them on a spectrum in terms of less active related to health and wellness, and more active in terms of health and wellness behaviors. And so on the less active side, we have what we're calling health denialists. So 1 in 10 Canadians, they say they live their life without worrying too much about their health and wellness. Then we have happy hearts. So 16% of Canadians, I care about my health, but mostly end up compromising it in favor of having a good time. So you can think of that as your YOLO group, right? Yeah, I'm worried about health, but life's short and I want to enjoy it. Totally fair. In the middle, you have risk minimizers. This is actually the biggest group in Canada. So 35% of Canadians classify themselves as risk minimizers. And that group, they're saying, I'm not the most active, but I want to improve my health by minimizing the things that are bad for me. After that, you have busy balancers, which is 25% of Canadians. So quarter Canadians say that, I want to lead a healthy life, but it's difficult because I'm busy. And so this tends to be young professionals, parents, got a lot going on in their lives, and they want to be healthier, but it's hard. And then on the complete, more active side of the spectrum, you have fitness enthusiasts. These are people that have ambitious health goals. They're advocates for healthy living. They want everyone to live a healthier lifestyle. Now, as you might imagine, if you're a brand, if you're a retailer, how each of these different groups approaches health and how you want to target them with your health messaging and products is going to be very different, right? So let's not worry about health denialists because we're not going to be able to target them very well. But if we focus on, say, happy hearts, the messaging is really about making health and wellness more fun, right? Can we gamify it? Can we make it more approachable? Can we make healthy living fun living? If you're talking to a risk minimizer, that biggest group, it's really about information and education, giving them the data they need or the information they need to help make those trade-offs. What is healthier? How can I figure out what's healthier? Provide me with all the information so I can make an informed choice. Busy balancers, just about making it easy, right? I got a million things going on. I got kids pick up. I got to feed them, and then I got work, and I never get enough time to eat a healthy lunch at work. And so how can we make things easier for busy balancers? And in many cases, they're the group that's more likely to pay a premium for those healthier options. So a good target for brands if we're trying to premiumize too. And then you have fitness enthusiasts. For them, just tell me how it's healthy, tell me how I'm gonna benefit from it, how my body's gonna benefit, sort of that traditional health and wellness messaging. And then if we go back to, just to give a little bit more depth around these groups, if we go back to the activities that we were just talking about that people were doing more of, we're seeing more of those across each of these groups. Sorry, one more data point on this slide. The gray numbers compared to the US, you may be wondering as well. Very similar numbers, a little bit more polarization in the US. So a little bit more health, a few more health denialists in the US and a few more fitness enthusiasts. So we see more on the poles and less in the middle. And then here's the data I was talking about in terms of different activities by health group. As you might expect, a lot of the health activity is driven by those top three segments: your fitness enthusiasts, your busy balancers, and your risk minimizers. And so particularly things like exercising regularly, eating nutritious food, some of those top activities that we're seeing, staying hydrated, even vitamins, minerals, and supplements are really driven by those three groups. Other things, avoiding certain people, maybe that's more of a mental health activity, avoiding alcohol consumption, pretty even across the different health groups. More good news, as we're thinking about the future of some of these activities, we can expect these trends to continue. So I mentioned, before we'd see an uptick at the beginning of the year and things kind of flattened out, and it was, year on year, it was the same. As we look to 2025, we're really expecting a lot of these trends to continue. Being January, we asked people about their New Year's resolutions. What do they want to do in their lives to make positive change in 2025? And a lot of the top things, as usual, are health related, but a lot of them are growing as well. So more people this year are saying they want to eat healthy. That's half of Canadians. 44% saying they want to exercise more, 37% saying they want to focus on their mental health. And these are all, increases from last year, spending more time with family and friends. So a lot of the health related ones increasing compared to last year. Eating healthier was the #1 resolution this year, as it was last year. So it makes sense that we're focused on health, healthy eating and food trends in today's session. For a lot of Canadians, healthy living is healthy eating, and healthy eating is healthy living, and those two are very synonymous with each other, maybe with the exception of those happy hearts that we talked about, the YOLO group, who would still want to perhaps eat unhealthy and also try to be healthy overall. But 75% of Canadians, so 3/4 of Canadians, say they proactively manage their health and wellness through the food and beverage choices they make. And we see, looking across the year, an increase in people that say that when they're shopping for food, they often buy higher quality products. Not to say that higher quality always means healthier, but there is a correlation there. And so we're seeing an increase in that throughout the year, which is a positive sign if you're in the food industry. As you might expect, those numbers are all higher too as we move to the right across those different health segments. So, you have the segments there in the middle, your denialists, your happy hearts, your risk minimizers, busy balancers, and fitness enthusiasts. And when we look at those statements of I proactively manage my health and wellness through my food and beverage choices, and when shopping for food, I often buy higher quality products, those all increase as we move to the right. Amongst busy balancers and fitness enthusiasts in particular, those numbers are really quite high, meaning, again, if we're targeting consumers, let's focus on those last 3 segments in particular. We see more opportunity there. So taking a step back, again, sort of to the macro context, if we look at food and grocery dining out in general, we do see consumer confidence in food growing. And so there's a lot of numbers on this slide. I'm going to just quickly explain to you what you're seeing. So the numbers here are the percentage of people who say that they're going to upgrade or spend more on groceries or on dining out in the month ahead, minus the people who say that they're going to downgrade or spend less on groceries or dining out in the month ahead. So it's a net of those 2 statements. Anything above 0 is you can think of as positive consumer confidence. Anything below 0, you can think of negative consumer confidence, and we've trended that over time. And so what we're really seeing here is that, consumer confidence really around the time in 2022, when inflation hit, took a dive when it came to food and beverages, both grocery and dining out. But over the past year, particularly 2024, we've seen a lot of that rebound, especially in grocery. Right now, we're back to sort of even, where an equal number of people are saying they're upgrading and downgrading. We're seeing sort of positive movement there. Dining out, also sort of on the positive trajectory, but still overall negative. And that's consistent with some of the other trends we're seeing, right? During the pandemic, we did see dining out, QSR decline. And while it's been increasing, it's still not back to those pre-pandemic levels. Okay, I have one more slide, and then I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Jenny. And I'm going to end my section on a bit of a high note. I know some of these slides are a little bit more depressing, but on a high note, there is an opportunity in the food and beverage space when it comes to health. 66% of Canadians, 2/3 of Canadians saying they try to avoid unhealthy foods so they can live longer. And that's up since we started tracking that in March. 86% of Canadians saying they believe their diet can significantly impact their physical appearance, which we know is particularly important amongst younger generations, and that's also up since March. And 1/3 of Canadians, 34%, saying that when it comes to food, their choices are driven more by health than by taste. I know that's a minority of Canadians. There's still more people that are taste driven, but that's a pretty healthy number. That's a pretty good number, right? A third of Canadians saying that, yeah, food, it's about enjoying the food and it's about the taste and everything. But, for me, health is more important. And then the last number, maybe a bit of a cautionary tale. So 40% of Canadians saying they feel optimistic about the future of the food that we eat. And just for reference, there's also about 40% that say they feel pessimistic about the future of the food we eat. So equal number of Canadians feeling sort of optimistic and pessimistic, 20% in the middle that said that they didn't know. And I think that number really acknowledges the pressures that we're seeing in the food industry right now, right? There's a lot going on. There's health trends, there's sustainability, there's supporting local, there's transparency around ingredients, there's food waste, cost implications, all sorts of issues. And consumers are recognizing that and they're acknowledging that. And really putting the onus on us, on brands, on retailers to try to build that consumer confidence back through food and beverage products, offerings, and the decisions that we make as companies. And so I think, sort of putting it back on us, what can we do to try to boost that consumer confidence that we were seeing, had slipped quite a bit, but is on the rebound. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny to talk about some food trends that we're seeing. So Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Nami, and good afternoon, everyone. I think these contextual points are so key to understanding because they really do feed into, no pun intended, this better and deeper understanding in terms of our food and beverage consumption trends. Everything has a trickle-down effect at the end of the day. Now, when we talk about connecting authentically with Canadians, it really means simultaneously delivering on a multitude of complex needs. And what we've noticed this year is that the complexity is really coming from this clashing of multiple factors or trends being true. And in the context of our trends report this year, we've really unveiled a lot of these different clashing themes. But of course, today we're here to talk about health and wellness as it relates to consumption. So, but even within this, we are seeing clashing themes. And I think Nami even alluded to this based on some of the groups that we looked at earlier. On one hand, we have this hyper focus on our health, and that's really this desire to adapt or adopt to new behaviors like eating well for longevity, for example. But simultaneously, we're also seeing this retreat to enjoyment. Nostalgia is a big one, comfort. We are human after all. And so, and I think largely these are reflective of these broader socioeconomic pressures that are at play. Of course, today, though, we are here to talk about health. And so we are going to focus on just this one side of the clashing trend. Now, as it relates to our health, there are some big numbers that we need to pay attention to. Overall, 1 in 5 Canadians report having a health-related condition. Now, it's not really surprising after what we've just talked about to see that those top reported conditions really revolve around weight concerns, as well as stress. Think of all the financial pressures we're under, back to busy lifestyles, uncertainty and polarizing topics with the environment and geopolitical concerns, even the politics in our own country. It's interesting, though, we can obviously look at these trends when it comes to kind of generational differences or differences in terms of region. So if we looked at this from a regional perspective, British Columbians overall are actually slightly lower in terms of reporting an overall health-related condition. But Albertans, on the other hand, are actually more likely to report weight concerns and stress. So it all depends on the audience that you're talking to and engaging with. But at the end of the day, Canadians are still facing a number of these health-related concerns. We also have certainly dialed in our focus on our health since the pandemic. And overall, 82% of Canadians agree that of all the things that I can do to maintain good health, eating right is the #1 most important. Now, we also see this reflected in a lot of positive momentum in terms of health-centric motivations. And these are motivations that are driving our actual consumption, what I'm actually eating and drinking on a daily basis. We see double-digit growth in things like fewer, simpler ingredients, premium quality ingredients, healthy, nutritious, fresh, less processed, pure, natural, made with real ingredients. I think the story here is pretty clear in terms of what Canadians are leaning into more and more. Now, we can also look at these in terms of, okay, how does that translate to the type of foods that we're eating? So if we look at the driver seeking something healthy, nutritious, for example, we can see that Canadians are now shifting into more home-prepared, home-cooked meals. So that could be prepared from scratch, or it could be leveraging a ready-made ingredient. And of course, we're shifting away from those ready-to-heat and eat or ready-to-eat options. Now, that's not to say we're completely throwing convenience out the window, but again, it's important as we look to what's driving the formats choices for these specific drivers, and we can see some of the differences there. I think it's also really important to call out that a lot of these trends we see emerging over time, and they're permeating far beyond these resolution kind of points in the year. So it's really interesting to see this heightened focus during that year, but we're also kind of seeing this over the long term in terms of like an elevated focus. Now, it's also really important that when we're talking about health in the future, we're talking about holistic health. And the reason for that is that when we look at a collective of mental health related drivers that are driving what we're actually eating and drinking, they're actually outpacing those physical functional drivers. And it's interesting to see that the younger generation, so Gen Z and millennials, they're the ones that are really driving the growth in these mental health related drivers. So at the end of the day, when we're talking about health, we obviously need to have that holistic mindset and, you know, encompass really both the body and the mind. Now, we're also experiencing this mainstream emergence of the GLP-1 agonist medications. And by that, I mean the Ozempics, the Wegovy's, the Trulicity's of the world. And I feel like on a weekly, almost daily basis, I'm seeing a lot of new emerging evidence coming out as far as, you know, certain benefits. Overall, broadly speaking, you know, these are kind of geared towards that blood sugar regulation, you know, appetite suppression that obviously has impacts on weight control and so on. But we asked Canadians a few questions. Number one, have you even heard of this type of medication? And among adults, 51% said that they have in fact heard of one of these type of medications. Further, 8% reported that they are currently taking a GLP-1 medication. And in terms of the primary reasons, not surprisingly, it's really revolving around the management of type 2 diabetes, but also a pretty sizable portion is being taken for weight control. Now, of course, these other reasons, we're seeing emergence of things like helping to mitigate Alzheimer's disease. And like I said, there seems to be a plethora of new benefits among other risks involved as well. But why is this important to know? Yes, it's a buzzworthy topic, but at the end of the day, while there isn't one specific GLP-1 diet to follow, there are many evidence-based recommendations that are talking about really focusing on whole foods, whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy and alternatives. And of course, what are we avoiding? We're avoiding the UPFs, those ultra-processed foods and beverages that are loaded with added sugars. So the bottom line is that this has big potential implications for, you know, of course, maybe more the indulgence categories, but it also has cross-category and industry implications as well, whether you're in the retail kind of leisure, athleisure, fashion kind of side of things as well. So it's something that in our 5 study, we will certainly continue to track as it relates to influencing, you know, certain consumption behaviors, but it'll be really interesting to see how this evolves over time as it perhaps becomes more mainstream. Now, in tandem with this, we're also seeing the adherence to various specific dietary regimes. And overall, 20% of Canadian adults report following one of these very specific dietary diets. We've seen kind of the ebb and flow over the top ranked over the last number of years. At the moment, gluten-free is number 1 and it's growing. But what we're seeing in terms of what we're focusing on, we're really going to hone our attention on those calorie-reduced diets and intermittent fasting. And that's really reflective of this kind of pull in and like reining in our intake patterns overall. The intermittent fasting is interesting. We've seen a pullback in that in year-over-year tracking. But if we looked at this among Gen Z, there is double-digit growth. And this tends to have more implications on maybe the breakfast occasion, for example. But by and large, this is what we're seeing. I think it's also interesting to call out some of these other vegetarian, vegan diets, which may have implications as it relates to kind of mitigating our impact on the planet. So at the end of the day, yes, they are somewhat small, but kind of collectively, it's still a sizable behavior in terms of adherence to these various diets. We also obviously have seen this, you know, increased desire for cleaner, simpler options. And I think what we've seen is this explosive innovation in the Canadian market. And that's really kind of adhering to this better for you space. And that's to support the increased desire for function and moderation. When we look overall, 45% of foods and commercial beverages, so excluding tap water here, they are driven by a nutritional or metabolic driver. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about mood boost as a benefit. I'm talking about weight control. Again, these are two key concerns that are having that trickle down effect in terms of, you know, the broader socioeconomic pressures that are at play for Canadians. Gut health, whether it's digestive health or kind of maintaining and improving our gut microbiome is a big one, as more and more Canadians kind of become more aware and educated on that connection. But as well, vitamin deficiency, supporting immunity, helping control blood sugar levels, again, not necessarily with the kind of weight management medications, but also on maybe more the women's health front as well. But of course, it's interesting to see how this is playing out in terms of the blurring of the category lines. And we've really seen that it's becoming increasingly complex. There's brands like Sapsucker, Wake Water, and those pre and probiotic sodas like Cove and Poppy that are really kind of merging on blending a few different categories together. And I know even internally on our teams, we're having debates as far as, you know, is it an energy drink? Is it a sparkling water? Can we actually consider these carbonated soft drink? And so, you know, it'll be interesting to see how consumers navigate this changing landscape over the next couple of years. We're also seeing this in confectionery. I know we wouldn't dare see like a health label claim on a gummy worm or a gummy bear, but I've seen double-digit protein content, for example, on some products recently with very, very low sugar. Now, this isn't necessarily fully kind of available mainstream, and certainly not at the mainstream price point, but it's still something to keep in mind as Canadians are kind of broadening their competitive set and leading into more of these functional foods and beverages. It's also important, though, we can talk kind of all day about these, you know, very specific nutritional and metabolic drivers, which seem very kind of complex and advanced, but at the end of the day, it's still important to keep the basics in mind. Oh, I'm sorry, I also forgot. When we talk about these functional foods and beverages, Canadians are also looking at these for two different reasons. So when we're talking about consuming foods, we're talking about looking at it for improving vitamin deficiency, muscle tone and health, so the protein content, for example, and also stemming down to immunity as well as our gut. Now, on the other hand, we're seeing a little bit different unique drivers for beverages, things like helping with sleep, but then on the other hand, also helping with cognitive function, like, you know, increased focus and mental stimulation, but then also reaching down into inflammation and so on. So as I said, a lot of these are complex and there's a lot of nuanced differences, whether you're talking to different generations and so on. But again, it's important to keep these basics in mind. So one of the benefits of being in field for well over a decade now is our ability to track over the long term. And when we look at the nutrition facts table item, and this is specifically the most important items, by and large, calories maintains that top spot. But what's really interesting is that we've seen the complete swapping of places for sugar and sodium. Sodium was once the villain, and now that's being replaced by sugar. And it's even kind of closing the gap in terms of kind of inching in closer to calories. We've also seen this notable growth for protein. I mean, barely on the radar back in 2015, and now we're seeing it hold on to like a pretty solid #4 spot. And it's even outpaced fat in terms of most important, kind of neck and neck there. The other element that we've been tracking that's really notable is this ingredients list, so what's in the product. And while that's softened a bit over the last number of years, I think by and large it's important to keep in mind that this is still among the top ranking items. Now, we can also look at this in terms of regional differences. British Columbians overall place a greater importance on sugar, while Albertans, on the other hand, focus heavier on the calories. So there's implications there in terms of, you know, which kind of levers you want to pull on and emphasize when you're talking to your consumers. The other added pressure that we're seeing, of course, for certain categories will be the front of pack legislation that's coming into play, especially over the next coming year. We've been tracking this for a little while, and we see that overall 68% of Canadians report that these front of pack symbols will influence their purchase decision, and that's up almost 1.5 points compared to 2023. Now, it'll be interesting to see, of course, how this plays out. Our data suggests that among those who are already label readers, it may not have such a great impact, but among those who aren't currently reading labels, there is potential to have, a bigger influence once these become more prominent on the front of packages. Now, we've talked about a lot of these added benefits, but there's also this other trend that we're seeing, and the focus on our intake is really being reflected into this trend towards moderation. When we look at average monthly servings and occasions, they're down for alcohol overall compared to 2023, and that's really being driven by those that are under 34. Of course, we've seen this shift towards more non-alcoholic beverages, and beer, which is the largest of the non-alcoholic category, has really experienced a notable growth, double-digit growth every single year in the past 3 years. And it's been super interesting to watch even local establishments pivot towards this trend. I know our local brewery here in Whitby, Ontario, we're just outside of the GTA, and we've seen them establish a core lineup of non-alcoholic beers, as well as really expanding their mocktail menu. So again, really interesting to see how this continues to shift as Canadians just hone in their focus on their health. Now, of course, there are many factors that are influencing our health, like we talked about before, a lot of these socioeconomic pressures, just that intrinsic control of being able to better our health. But there's also the role that technology plays as it relates to influencing how we're eating and drinking. We're really at this time of peak access to information. Look at the explosive, evolution of AI technology already. But then at the same time, we're also experiencing this trust deficit and growing information skepticism. But the role of technology still plays an important one as it relates to influencing our health decisions, how we're sourcing information to make health and food and beverage choices, to how we're preparing in the kitchen. And as I said, it continues to evolve. Overall, 28% of Canadians report sourcing information from tech-enabled tools and platforms that are influencing our daily food and beverage choices. And I'm talking about website searches, I'm talking about seeking new recipes, anything from the apps, all the apps, millennials love scanning them, the nutrition tracking apps and so on. And so it's important to kind of keep tabs on where they're navigating to find this information. On the other hand, though, we see that 58% of Canadians fear that technological progress is actually destroying our lives, which sounds pretty extreme, but it's most notable among Gen Z consumers, so our younger consumers who have undoubtedly grown up with technology. We also see that only 35% actually trust companies that are using AI. Now, I think what we've seen is more kind of infiltration in terms of our usage in the workplace, but we do see things like AI-powered smart kitchens and some usage in terms of, recipe inspiration and so on. So it'll be really interesting to see how a quickly evolving technology will eventually influence our food and beverage decisions as well. Now, of course, technology is also interacted differently when it comes to generations. When it comes to the growth of wearable technology, we're seeing this growing not only among Gen Z, which makes sense, but also among our boomer generations who are really kind of adapting to this new technology, or not necessarily new technology, but technology to really influence their behavior. For Gen Z, podcast is a big one that's driving growth as far as sourcing information from. And again, this is all tied to our health and wellness and consumption decisions. And then finally, millennials are increasingly seeking information from branded food and beverage websites. This was a bit surprising to me, but at the same time, they're just wanting to go to the source of information as it relates to brands that they're choosing. Now, it's super interesting because social media is still kind of that top channel for Gen Z and millennials, which is a channel that is completely ripe with conflicting information. So I find that really fascinating. But nonetheless, it's important to kind of be present where your consumers are and be aware of where they're sourcing this information from. we've talked about, a lot of these macro forces, and at the 10,000 foot level, it's really important to understand how they're influencing our consumption patterns. But in the context of our CHATS report, every year we also look at how this plays out in terms of different day parts, so breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacking. Now, snacking is a mainstay in our consumption patterns. It's not going anywhere in terms of our kind of ingrained habit in our lifestyle, but it's also one that we've seen really not take a hit, but really be influenced by this better for you boom and kind of lean into the health and wellness space. Now, broadly speaking, when we look at kind of what type of foods we're snacking on, it's still inherently skewing towards indulgent foods. So I'm talking about chocolate, chips, candy, potato chips, frozen confectionery, and so on. But what we can see is this shift from pre-pandemic periods into more healthy oriented categories. And that just really kind of underlines this, not complete reversal of the trend, but again, just that heightened awareness and increase in terms of what we're actually consuming, skewing towards more healthy. Now, by and large, our top-ranked motivations for snacking still revolve around, craving something that's tasty, a treat reward, comfort is a big one. But when we look to the future, it's important to understand, okay, well, what's growing? And in this case, we see some of the fastest growing motivations for snack occasions and for foods in particular, really revolving around that relax, unwind, kind of de-stress, again, tying into these emotional concerns, but also something that's pure and natural, made with real ingredients, as well as premium and quality ingredients. I think it's also interesting to see that ritual or habit, as well as pulling back on our waste, that kind of, pulling in our guilt and looking for kind of a more permissible option. This requirement for functionality also is stretching into our snacking occasions as well, as 44% of snacking occasions overall are being driven by a nutritional or metabolic driver, and that's up 6 points compared to 2023. Now, overall, a lot of these nutritional or metabolic drivers are very much in line with what we saw overall, revolving around mood boost, again, that emotional component, but also weight control, a solid number 2. Then that play into the gut health, digestive health, immunity, vitamin deficiency, blood sugar control. So it's important to keep these in mind, that even when we're talking about snacking, there's this play in terms of nutritional and metabolic factors. Now, what's really interesting is also to see that these top-ranked foods that are consumed at snack that are better for you categories, that is kind of a collection of better for you drivers. Of course, we're seeing categories like fruits and cheese and yogurts that are coming to the top, but we're also seeing categories that aren't inherently healthy. We're seeing chocolate, we're seeing frozen confectionery, potato chips and cookies. So I think the key message here is that there is a role for both sides to play on in terms of really delivering on these better for you motivations. And it's important to keep that in mind and to really deep dive into understanding this in terms of how consumers are interacting with it at snack occasions. So we have covered a lot today, but at the same time, I feel like we've really only scratched the surface. We could pretty much go on and on all day about a lot of these trends, but I think with that, we will pass it back to Cameron to wrap things up.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Nami. Just incredible content. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to share it, and very engaging, but also really informative. Just monitoring the questions here. One question that came up is about younger generations and how their desire to live and be healthy is impacting how they're consuming and how they're taking care of their well-being. Is that something that comes up in your research at all when you look at sort of Gen Z and millennials? Are they showing up in a different way than legacy groups?
I know Jenny talked a little bit about it. I can start. I don't know, Jenny, if you have anything to add to that one, but it's interesting. We get that question a lot around Gen Z and millennials. And I would say it's not a given that all younger consumers are health-oriented consumers. There's definitely a skew for a lot of activities. So in our essentials data, certain things like exercising, focus on mindfulness, mental health, which Jenny talked about, are more prominent amongst younger generations. And there's a lot of trends that we see, the things that you hear about. There's on TikTok, there's a group that's Fit Talk, and you hear about sleep maxing and bed rotting. So like this idea of just trying to get more rest. There's forest bathing, right? Going out, the young people going out and spending more time in nature. So there's a lot of trends that are driven by younger generations for sure, and we do see that in the data. But at the same time, there are certain trends that are more driven by older generations. Like when it comes to eating healthier overall, that is one where in our data, boomers over-index. So the desire to eat healthy is not just a young person's trend. And then when we look across the different sort of health profiles that I talked about, there's definitely a difference in generation as well. So the way we approach different generations might be different. Boomers, older generations tend to be more risk minimizers, right? So it's about educate me, give me the data I need to make an informed decision so that I can make the best choice for me. Younger generations tend to over-index in the busy balancers, which I talked about, sort of young families, young professionals, where there can be something convenient, and the happy hearts, where it's like, I want to be healthy, but I want to have fun. So, for younger generations, it's maybe more about, make it fun, make it accessible, make it convenient. For older generations, it's more maybe about, tell me what I need to know to make those decisions, educate me, help me make an informed choice. So those are some of the things that we're seeing. Jane,
yeah, definitely. I think it's a really good point, and I think there's a few key things here. I mean, overall, what we're seeing is that we're in a really interesting time when it comes to the generations. We're kind of at this unique inflection point where multiple generations are holding our attention, not just, this heavy focus on millennials anymore. It's kind of this, I wouldn't say like purely even distribution, but we've got the focus of the Gen Z, the millennials, and the boomer consumers. When it comes to our health too, we know that boomers tend to be a lot more reactive when it comes to their health and consumption patterns, whereas younger generations tend to be a lot more proactive. And again, that's kind of coming in with those, nutritional, metabolic, kind of functional drivers really coming into play. But again, I think the more that, we also keep in mind these mature consumers, they are, still a significant portion of the population, as well as accounting for a sizable portion of our wealth. So it's definitely a lot of opportunity to dig into each of the generations in more detail.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate the additional context. I think with that, we're close to time, so we should probably finish things up. Ellen, I'll just hand it back to you to close off. And Jenny, Nami, thank you again for your time today and the great presentation. And to everyone on the bridge, thank you for joining us. Happy to host from the Vancouver office and look forward to talk to everybody again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow, I just really want to thank Jenny and Nami for today's really detailed and amazing presentation. And yes, you will get a link to today's recorded presentation, and that should probably come within the next few days. Also, be on the lookout for our next session in this series, which is coming up in February, I think February 26th, right, Cameron?
That's right.
And I think the topic is mobility and electric vehicle adoption.
Yeah, EV adoption and trends. Going to be really interesting.
That's right. So thank you for joining us for today. We look forward to you joining us next time. That now concludes today's amazing webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Take care.